Hello, and thanks for streaming The Near Futurist, a show presented by me, Guy Clapperton. This is a fortnightly look at the technologies that are going to affect our lives in, wait for it, the near future. Now, one of the frustrations about doing a futurist podcast is that predictions in the past have gone so wrong. I'm in the UK, and we used to have a TV programme called Tomorrow's World, which once predicted clothing would be made from recycled items, and it showed people wearing stitched together 45 RPM records and CDs, all sorts of junk, as if they were clothes. Now, I admit that's kind of happened, but what they didn't anticipate was that the manufacturers would make these things look like clothes first. Not a bad idea. But more importantly than that, we were all supposed to have flying cars by now, weren't we? I mean, where have they gone? Did the Jetsons die for nothing? Actually, hold that thought. Not about the Jetsons, but about the car. So let's introduce our guest for today. He was the Ernst & Young 2015 Entrepreneur of the Year in Slovakia, and he hasn't relaxed after that. In a previous life, he was founder and CEO of C2I, a leading engineering and manufacturing company supplying carbon fibre components to most premium automotive companies. He sold a large controlling stake of C2I to LG Houses, an LG Group company, obviously from the name, and now focuses on his current company, Aeromobile, which makes, of course, flying cars. His name is Patrick Hessel. Patrick, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
You're more than welcome. First of all, can you tell me a little bit about Aeromobile?
Aeromobile is poised to bring to market true flying cars. Aeromobiles, we call them, which are single vehicles providing door-to-door travel on the road and through the air. The company has a 10-year history of design and development and also key patent positions around the drive-fly technology. So the Aeromobile uses existing road and air transport infrastructure, unlike other vehicles like the eVTOLs, which are the electric vertical takeoff and landing type of vehicles. We're well on the way in the progress with the Civil Aviation Authority certification process as to the EASA CS23 certification. And our team and board consists of industry veterans from automotive, aerospace, and airline operations. We are based in terms of the engineering office in Slovakia, Bratislava, and the business team is really across the US and Europe. And as such, we're looking to be a vertically integrated, asset-light, and multi-revenue stream company, looking to have a first flying car in 2023 with a two-seater, and then coming out with a three-seater in 2025. And I'll tell you about that later, I suppose.
Sure. I mean, I mentioned the Jetsons. I'm sure you'll have heard all those jokes. And likewise, I remember watching The Man with the Golden Gun as a child, in which the bad guy gets away from James Bond by turning his car into a plane. Now, I'll be honest, I'm unlikely to need to get away from James Bond in my time. So why in the real world do we actually need flying cars? What's the advantage?
Our first vehicle is a two-seater, and that's repositioned within the B2C market. So you're selling it direct to a consumer. And I'm personally also a pilot, and I have multiple sports cars, and I enjoy both worlds. So I would say one of the answers to that is from a purely functional point of view, that I can imagine many trips that I could do with a flying car that would take me maybe 2-3 hours, which otherwise would take me maybe 6-7 hours by car, and which are just difficult to do in any other way. So it basically, we could argue, it extends my radius of life of where I would really choose to go. I would not maybe choose to go somewhere if it takes me like 7 hours by car for a weekend or even a potentially business meeting, which I would choose to do if it takes me only 2-3 hours. So that's one kind of use case, one reason. Another reason is, basically, why do people own high-performance cars or supercars? They don't typically drive them, 400 kilometers an hour on the road. It's largely also for the enjoyment of having a very special type of vehicle. So these are sort of also collectors, and we see definitely that's one element of why you want to have a flying car, because it's ultimately very cool. It's a very distinctive type of product with a lot of really complex engineering behind it plus it's a beautifully looking vehicle. So I would say you have both aspects, the functional aspect and the non-functional aspect. That's really for the vehicle that you can own. And then there is also the next generation vehicle that we are developing is a 3-seater, 1 pilot, and 2 seats in the back, which are business class seats. And in that vehicle, you can order a trip from literally a door-to-door trip. It's an aerial ride-hailing service. You order the vehicle straight to your house. It comes targeted within 60 minutes, and it delivered, drops you off at your final destination. So it's an alternative way of traveling, and you don't have to own the vehicle. So there's different reasons why I would say you want to have a flying car or use the service of that.
Tell me about the technology behind it. What makes it run? I understand, for example, these are convertible cars you're talking about. You can actually drive them along the road and they convert into a flying car.
Yeah, that's right. So our flying car is a vehicle that has 4 wheels. It can drive on the road like any normal car. And then the front cabin resembles that of a sports car. It's wider than a small aircraft. Also, it's more comfortable as a result, and it's more familiar to kind of the sports car owners. And then you can drive. You drive to a grass strip runway, or even just a strip of on your private property. You press a button, and the wings, which are stowed behind the cabin, basically folded backwards, they unfold by 90 degrees. And in that moment, it literally the vehicle looks like it is a fixed wing aircraft in that moment. We have other unfolding elements like the rear bumper, for example, and other smaller elements. And in that moment, you can literally take off just like if you were a small airplane. You land, you follow the wings backwards, and you continue driving straight off the runway to your next destination. I mean, one of the challenges from an engineering point of view is how do you merge the automotive and aerospace requirements, right? There's quite different, obviously, objectives when you design each. But one of what it ultimately comes down to is weight. We are adding some automotive features and technology into the vehicle, which makes it heavier. And as a result, you basically on our 2-seater, you can only carry basically 2 people instead of maybe 4 to 5 people that you could in maybe an equivalent type of size aircraft. And the range we have is around 450 miles, which is definitely less than you would have in a fixed wing aircraft. But at the same time, that's what makes it possible, just that you have less of a payload, less of a range, but with the benefit of being truly flexible on the ground and in the air. You can make the decision whether to drive or to fly anytime, just yourself.
Forgive me for being cynical, but there is a major trend away from high fuel consumption at the moment worldwide, even moving to electric vehicles. I'm just wondering how the flying variety of vehicles stack up in that world.
Our first vehicle is powered with a hybrid powertrain. So in the air, it's powered by an internal combustion engine, and on the ground, it's powered fully electrically. And so that's our first phase. And basically, with time, as the battery energy density improves, we are going to also implement a fully electric version, but that will require some time. There's still a lot of development to be done on the market to achieve that, and pretty much that's in line with the general trends in aviation, where you see already first R&D projects in fully electrified aircraft, but still in terms of the real emergence of such planes commercially, they haven't started yet. But I would say we're very much aligned with that general trend towards full electrification.
Do you want to sound as confident as my interviewee in this episode? If you talk to the press or other media, are you worried you'll be misquoted, or they'll just publish their story and not yours? Clapperton Media Associates can help with coaching. Drop me a note, guy@clapperton.co.uk, and we'll arrange a time for an exploratory call. Now, back to the podcast. Okay, that may have anticipated my next question, of course, which is about, at the moment, people are urged to use public transport where possible to avoid pollution and to avoid having to create too many vehicles, of course. I'm just wondering whether an individual trying a flying car actually goes against that at all.
Again, I would say, one of the benefits of a flying car or even an airplane is that you can go a direct route. So the actual number of kilometers or miles that you travel are less than, for example, with a car. Still, the fuel consumption per distance is higher. So that can balance out or potentially against you. So it's not really the transport mode that will be the least polluting, but at the same time, again, in the midterm, we are moving also towards a fully electric powertrain, and then it's really all a question about the shift of the energy production to renewable energy production. I think it's no good if you just have an electric powertrain if the electricity put inside has been produced with burning fossil fuels. So I think that's just a wider discussion on when the energy production will actually shift to renewables. And once we achieve that, I think you have a fully renewable system, and we can offer that as well. And we'll have that in our Aeromobiles.
That's very clear, thank you. One thing that occurs to me is, of course, we're about to see a major revolution in drone technology, so it's going to be flying objects which have not got people in them. That's going to cause a lot of changes in the regulatory environment. You've got to regulate, you've got to legislate. If you've got to allow for flying cars, is there any legislation there in place yet? Is that being considered? How are we going to actually administer all this?
We have gone out to design the flying car after having done a first couple of prototypes in the years 2010 to 2014 was to design the vehicle around existing legislation as a car and separately as a plane, in order not to have to negotiate new type of regulations with the legislators. So basically in the car mode, we are certifying the vehicle as a car. We need to satisfy all the standard requirements of the car. The fact that it has, say, wings, that it carries wings on its back is in that moment not an issue for that certification. And likewise, for an airplane, we are basically fully developing within existing regulations and legislation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Tell me about learning to drive. One of the things, I can drive a car, but I can't pilot a plane at the moment. So what would I need to learn if I were to decide to acquire one of these?
The good thing, first of all, you can own and drive a flying car just with your normal driving license, because you can just drive it on the road, which you cannot do when you have an airplane. And of course, in order to fly it, you need to have a private pilot license, a PPL, which is, let's say, the standard pilot license you need to fly a small airplane. And that takes around 45 hours of practical experience plus some theory in order to do. Of course, there's a lot less pilots than people driving cars, but at the same time, even 100 years ago, people couldn't imagine that pretty much everybody will have a driving license. And look today, it's just became a standard norm. I'm not saying that we will see that in 10 years that everybody has a pilot license, but still, it's very much something you can do if you're enthusiastic about it, and it'll take you maybe 3 to 6 months to do so.
Okay, we get to the size of the market in a second, which you just alluded to, and I think that is important, but I would like to stick with the practicalities for the moment. Safety has to be a concern about this. Enough people, too many people, are killed and injured at ground level. If you're falling out of the sky, there's an even lower chance of survival. So tell me about safety.
Yeah, first of all, safety is the key design consideration for the vehicle and always has been, because we recognize that it's just so important for the whole viability of the product and as a result for the company. So as such, in the air, we consider this to be potentially the safest aircraft because of a couple of aspects. First of all, it has a vehicle recovery ballistic parachute, meaning you can pretty much pull the parachute and the whole vehicle, the whole flying car as such, will come down relatively slowly in the parachute. That's one thing you can deploy. So you can use that in all sorts of emergencies. And on top of that, because we have to, unlike any aircraft, satisfy the automotive certifications, there's a lot of requirements about the structure of basically the chassis. And basically we have designed a carbon fiber crash structure from the front, and the whole structure in which you sit is a carbon fiber monocoque, or like a carbon fiber chassis really, which is significantly stiffer than any aircraft would ever have, because airplanes are not designed for crash, and whereas cars are. So that's an additional benefit. You're basically protected in that cell. And on top of that, we are also incorporating airbags, which are basically systems which you don't have in an airplane. So basically adding automotive safety technology into an aircraft is just increasing the safety of the aircraft and as such of the flying car.
Okay, the other practical point, of course, is I have an okay income myself, and already my "I can't possibly afford this" glands are going into overdrive. To what extent is this a rich person's toy? You've compared it to a classic car, for example.
So the first vehicle, the two-seater, is definitely going to be quite expensive. It's going to be around $1.7 million. So it is a vehicle that surely only few people can afford. But partially that's also one of the reasons is that we want to position it as a very unique vehicle that is not for everybody. And partially it's also, of course, more expensive to develop, and we have to recover the R&D costs. So the first vehicle is limited, I would say, to the number of people. Now, that's why the second vehicle, we are democratizing the use of the flying car, and that basically with this aerial door-to-door ride-hailing, where you can order yourself a flying car to your house through an app, you basically, in that moment, pretty much most people in the Western world, at least, can afford it, at least on an occasional basis. Of course, it's a lot cheaper than, for example, private aviation, but it's still going to be more expensive than just driving your own car. But it's definitely moving the whole use to the masses, basically.
Okay, so how big do you imagine the market's actually going to be for this?
So when we look at our sweet spot in terms of the use, especially now we're talking about the ride-hailing service, and that's the main market really in the long run, then we have to look at the sweet spot in terms of the distance, and we see this to be around 150 to 500 miles in terms of the distance. And then we need to look at how do people normally do these trips. So that's typically either by car and largely by car. Then there is commercial aviation and there's private aviation. In some parts of the world, you have good train networks, although in many parts you don't. For example, in the US, the train network is actually rather poor and at times just not existent. And you look at the number of trips, and from just looking also at the time saving and the cost to alternatives, we estimate basically the number of trips we can sell per year, and we see this in the many millions of trips, which just across the US alone, which would be our starting point. And there we then talking about many thousand vehicles that would be out there on the market within this B2C, B2B2C, within the ride-hailing segment. Now, within the first vehicle, the two-seater, the private, to be privately owned type of vehicle, that the number is going to be much smaller. We're looking at within the hundreds of vehicles.
Okay, and you were running through some of the timescales earlier. Could you just run through those again, when we can start to see working models actually in the sky?
Sure. So our two-seater is going to be launched in 2023. And the five-seater we're planning for late 2025, which is, our three-seater, did I say that? And that's going to be about 2 years later. That's a vehicle for the aerial ride-hailing service.
Okay, and finally, in case people would like to put their name down and order one, because I'll be honest with you, I do have a birthday next month if my family's listening, where can people find out more about yourself and about Aeromobile?
I think the best way really is on our webpage, aeromobile.com. You can also follow us on social media, obviously all the standard media platforms, and that's it.
Okay, Patrick Hessel of Aeromobile, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
And of course, many thanks to you for listening. That was the Near Futurist podcast with me, Guy Clapperton. Don't forget to have a look at the website at nearfuturist.co.uk, or indeed my media training site at remotemediatraining.com. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time.